Welcome to Birdsong with your host, Kayuda Kiora, exploring all things related to the path of shamanism, nature-based spirituality, truth-seeking, storytelling, awakening, health and wellness, earth-honouring traditions, ceremony, ritual, rites of passage, and of course, a remembering of the sacred ways. Hey everyone, it's Caillou here. Welcome to another episode of Birdsong, and in this particular conversation, we have Skye and Helm joining us, our first trialogue in our Birdsong episodes, and this was a great conversation, and we get pretty deep into a number of themes, such as the culture of disconnect and separation that plagues the collective sphere that we find ourselves in. We explore the reorientation of our perception to animistic worldviews, which means reorienting and re-envisioning how we relate, how we interact with our world and all of the beings here within our world, both animate and inanimate, and recognizing them as soulful intelligences, as spirit that flows through in a seemingly infinite amount of earthly expressions. We also talk about their many years in the Amazon jungle, studying Amazonian curanderismo, Amazonian shamanism, the frameworks that the indigenous Shipibo passed on to them to assist in the greater sense-making of how to relate with a living, breathing jungle, and extrapolating out from that, a living, breathing planet, and how this path interrelates into the work that they're currently doing, known as deep ecology, which is actually also known as the work that reconnects, alongside many other mind-boggling and heart-opening stories and weavings throughout our trialogue. So before we get into it, a little bit of a bio. Skye was raised on a farm, and you could also say that she was raised by that same farm on the edge of a wildlife reserve in South Africa. Her early childhood was spent wandering barefoot, immersed in the imaginal worlds that emerged between her senses and the touch of lion's roar, river song, and rolling thunderstorms across the bushveld, which you might consider to be a subtropical woodland ecoregion of Africa. Her teen years were spent hand-raising and rehabilitating wildlife, and she later became a wilderness guide. She trained in traditional Taoist healing practices for 3 years. She became a qualified yoga instructor, and this was all before traveling to the Peruvian Amazon to undergo her in-depth apprenticeship in Amazonian curanderismo. Helm also grew up close to nature, but attempted to civilize himself through higher education and for a few years as a corporate lawyer. But as he puts it, through the good fortune of an existential crisis, he wound up in the jungle, and this is where he and Skye met. And there was a remembrance in what it felt like to belong to the world. And along the way, he trained as a counsellor, a psycho-therapeutic journey practitioner, alongside breathwork and bodywork. And they now apprentice themselves to the deep ecological movement that is arising in response to the darkness of the modern industrial growth culture. And these movements include the work of John Seed and Joanna Macy, which is the work that reconnects. And overall, their offerings are a synthesis of plant medicine practice and ecological awakening, which includes the facilitation of study groups, retreats, intensives, and one-on-one sessions. And that's it. Let's get straight into it. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And I trust you will find value in our dialogue, or rather our trialogue, to carry with you on your own path forward. Skye and Helm. So this is essentially new territory for me, having two guests on the show at once. However, I know from previous listenings that you are no strangers to appearing on shows as a duet. So it's a pleasure to be able to sit down with you both and have a ripe conversation on many things that are at the forefront of all of our musings and the ways in which we're deepening into our relating with the world. And as you both know to some degree, I'm sure, stitched throughout the garment of this show is the expression of honoring the sacred and opening up a container for us to cultivate greater levels of presence, intention, respect, acknowledgement, relationship, gratitude, the invoking of certain energies. So I would firstly love to give my thanks for joining me and having this conversation. And I would love to invite you both to share some sentiments in alignment to this theme of opening space and honoring the sacred.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us to share. Yeah, I've really, really been enjoying your podcast so far. And yeah, it's very in alignment with all the things we're interested in. So yeah, I'm grateful for you sharing your medicine. Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that feels important when it comes to opening a space, especially kind of I guess almost a ritual conversation that we're engaging in here is acknowledging primarily and firstly the country that we're on. I'm not sure exactly which country you're on, but we're on the Wurundjeri country of the Wurundjeri Aboriginal people, are part of the Kulin Nation and the Woiwurrung language group. And we would just like to acknowledge that this is unceded country, and that for tens of thousands of years, just the exquisite kind of care and deep, deep, deep bone connection to this land that they have had and still have today. And I guess for us, especially in this acknowledgement, like the second layer, which has been feeling important recently, is also acknowledging the injustices that our ancestors kind of wrought when they settled into either Australia or some of the other countries. I'm South African, so for me more in that context. But yeah, this kind of ancestral injustices and
unshed tears.
Yeah, we actually, I went and attended an amazing talk by Uncle Stephen True Arrow last year at the Earth Ethics Conference, and the theme of his talk was connecting to country. And as he started speaking, he kind of paused and collected himself, and then he was like, actually, we can't really talk about connecting it to country until we acknowledge the tears that are soaking this land. And it was a really powerful moment to just speak that, because I think, especially as a South African, I've only been here for 3 years. That's the feeling of that is really present for me, but I feel like it's often often unacknowledged. And so, I just wanted to very sincerely acknowledge the pain that is still present here and the unmetabolized grief that sits in this country, in the soil of this country. And our commitment to wanting to decolonize our own minds and bodies and hearts, and so that we can come into right relationship with this place, which is a process we're already engaged in, but it will be, I imagine, lifelong. So I think that would be the first acknowledgement I would want to make before any sacred conversation, or any conversation, actually. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, you said it perfectly.
And then I think also to just kind of call in or invoke the other than human beings, the web of life that is kind of holding us, and even, all the things that are happening that allow this conversation to take place at all. So just kind of, I guess, coming into gratitude, but not a superficial positive thinking bypassy gratitude, which I know it sometimes can be, but more of a kind of opening into the presence of all these things that are happening, so that we can even be here at all. It's a lot of circumstances had to be right for me to even exist. So just calling in and acknowledging all of that, the wider web, the wider ecology that we're a part of in this moment.
And I'd also just want to again thank you for doing this, whatever form it is. It's thanking you for listening to your to the impulse, the greater impulse coming through you to do this kind of thing, because it's hard to do. It takes time and energy, and there's a lot of competing interests, and there's a lot of darkness around that kind of detracts you from listening. So I wanted to thank you for that, and I also wanted to give gratitude for this relationship. because it's the foundation of my life. And yeah, this work that we participate in is this. I feel like there's a kind of the emergent property that happens when we come together is the thing that participates in this work of this larger body of work. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful sentiments and a lovely way to deepen into our conversation together. And that's really interesting what you said there, Skye, in regards to the gratitude and not perceiving gratitude in this overly hyper positive way that it can often be portrayed in. Because just as you were saying those words, I got the sense within me that gratitude is often coupled, or maybe not even coupled, it is accompanied by so many other emotions. When I am feeling into my gratitude in the context of the larger interconnected web of all our relations here, all our other than humans, because it does bring up simultaneously alongside those deep feelings of gratitude and thanks for being here and all the beauty that life contains, but also the tears that you speak to and the grief that is present in all that you've shared. And I know that finding ways to language and re-envision our relationship to grief has been a part of both of your work, a big part of both of your work, and I would love to get into that later. But as suggested by both of you, and in resonance with my own intentions for having you both on, it seems like we all feel like it would be a great launching pad to our dialogue, or trialogue maybe, by providing a framework for the work that you're both doing. And we can start to do this by taking a look at what you language as the elephant in the room being the collective sphere that we find ourselves in. And this elephant is the way in which we are or have been perceiving our environment on a collective level, perceiving our reality, our place within the greater Gaian sphere that we inhabit. And the way that I speak about this in very, very basic terms is that we're disconnected. We're disconnected from the natural world, and largely as a collective, we fail to recognize our planet and all beings on our planet as living, breathing entities with their own unique, soulful essence, and all within inextricable relationship with one another. And it's not just about the conceptual recognition, although that's arguably one place to start, but it goes so much deeper down to the felt, sense, experienced, embodied recognition of being in relationship to all life within our immediate ecology. But, also extrapolating out from our immediate ecology to the bigger picture, a Gaian perspective, or even a cosmic perspective, perhaps. And I will read out a quote here that you have shared with me, and then I'll pass it over to both of you to let the tendrils unfurl to a greater degree. And this particular quote is: "We feel that our ecological function is to address the crisis of perception that we see to be at the root of the intersectional troubles of our time. We're talking about the pernicious misunderstanding that humans are separate and superior to the rest of creation. Our work is focused on awakening from the human trance of separation and anthropocentrism and into the truth of interbeing, our identity as interconnected and interdependent cells in the living body of the earth." And I love this idea that you're both activists of perception. So it'd be great to have you both unpack and expand on this and start from this place.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you. But you spoke to all of that really beautifully. Where to begin? It's kind of a tricky one. I think where I'd like to start is what you were pointing to, which is the elephant in the room. And I think that might be particularly relevant for anyone who might be listening to this later on down the track, that, you know, we're in June 2020. And just in the last 6 months, Australia, we just came through what's now known as the Black Summer, some of the most catastrophic fires on record, maybe ever, I'm not sure. Followed very shortly by, I mean, we had a tiny little break between that, and then COVID hit, COVID-19, which is in itself a multi-layered crisis. And then, as we're kind of, at least in Australia, the world is still going through COVID, but in Australia, we're kind of emerging from COVID now. And within a few weeks, we're in these major racial uprisings. And at the same time, we've just had one of the biggest oil spills in history up in the Arctic Circle in Siberia. And so that's just the last 6 months. That's nothing to speak to this kind of larger context of climate derangement and ecological collapse and mass species extinction. This is the moment that we're in as a species right now, and the larger kind of what we talk about is the elephant in the room, the kind of larger collective context for everything that we're doing, you know. And so I just feel like it's really potent to name that and kind of have those movements kind of mentioned. And then alongside that, of course, is this larger revolution, or larger, I don't know if it's larger, but a simultaneous revolution of people really on the ground working for another way of being. And that's kind of, I guess, the revolution that won't be televised, but that's also happening at the same time. And so, yeah, just to kind of name that right at the outset.
Yeah, I mean, that's the context in which the work that we participate takes place. You know, it's the work that we do is a response to kind of feeling into our world and feeling the pain of what's happening on some levels at least, and just having a kind of heartfelt response to that. You know. And I think the phrase "the elephant in the room" is particularly pertinent when we're talking about kind of interpersonal work, which is like originally when we got into doing plant medicine work, which we can talk about in a minute. There's this kind of belief, I think, in the kind of personal growth realm. That individual. There's kind of you do individual personal work on yourself, and that's how you kind of contribute to the larger healing of the world, and the rest of the world kind of has to sort itself out. Or you do activism work, in a different sphere, and you're kind of picketing and protesting and chaining yourself to bulldozers and things like that. And I feel like there's been this separation between those two things. But the elephant in the room for our purposes was this, fact that we're living in this world that is kind of on fire, and we can't anymore separate the individual healing from the collective healing.
Yeah. And so I think what happened for us is that in the last, particularly the last 3 years, but longer than that, we've kind of really been feeling into what you've spoken about as this kind of separation consciousness, the separation story that you mentioned in the quote, and this kind of awareness. We've been kind of bringing into awareness the sense of the human story and how it impacts the way that we see our world. But not only that, but the way it's shaped all the systems that we engage in day in and day out, including transport system and food system and education system, and like every system, I read a article just the other day describing all the kinds of systems rooted in this story of separation that we go through just from the moment of waking up and getting to work, without even realizing it, and the kind of disconnection and inherent unconscious violence of those systems, and this is something that when we went to Peru and we started to do our work with the plants and do this kind of internal healing, there wasn't an awareness of this. And it was this kind of sense of, oh, well, if we just fix that, then it'll be okay. But after a while, we really kind of came to realize that that the kind of internal healing and the external world that we're a part of, they mutually condition each other. And so if you're coming into awakening experiences on your own, but then going back every single day into these cultures of separation, it's really hard to kind of grow that experience of interbeing and connection when you're wired to resonate with this culture, and it's constantly giving you the opposite message, and so it was Joanna Macy, I think, I can't remember the exact quote, but she basically speaks to how awakening of the self and cultural change are they're interdependent, they're mutually arising, and we need to be kind of working in both dimensions at once in order to really kind of affect change. If we don't want it to be just these little isolated bubbles of privileged awakening while the world falls apart. It was a very important and potent kind of realization on the path for both of us that we've been sitting with for the last few years.
Yeah, and the work that Reconnects, that we facilitate and participate in, helps to remedy this kind of dualism between like internal spirituality and external, like being in the world, once we finished with our time in the jungle, towards the end especially, we really felt this cognitive dissonance, this like okay, like we're wanting to connect to ourselves really deeply and connect to the earth really deeply, but everything's on fucking fire, and like how do we marry these two things, these two realities, because as you can probably appreciate with working with the medicines in the way that you do, the spiritual realms that can be kind of catalyzed or unlocked or accessed with plant medicine can often seem, in a sense, more real in some ways than what's happening in the so-called 3D. But we really have experienced a big cognitive dissonance between that kind of internal awakening and then actually like what's going on, and wanting to like look at that, and wanting to ask the question, I think, how do we integrate our experiences as well? Because if you are serious in your kind of personal spiritual practice, eventually you have to kind of look at how to live, in the wider ecology in which you're situated, and that's to say nothing of like actually giving back to the earth that is the ground of our entire being, and that we owe everything to.
Yeah, look, well said to both of you. And it is quite the predicament that we are in. And it's an interesting thing to look at this intersection of the internal personal work that we do, whether we are languaging that as personal development or spiritual expansion, and the activism work, and integrating these together. But as you just spoke to, Helm, what is it that we are integrating into? And it's a strange thing for us to be integrating back into these structures and systems that are ultimately, as you speak to, on fire.
Yeah. What does it mean to be integrated into a deeply unwell culture? What does personal healing mean when the rest of the system that you're in is unwell? So I think that this work is really about kind of questioning that duality, between what happens with what matters to me and what happens to me in the meaning of my life, and what happens to the rest of the world, and the meaning of my life in relationship with the world, I think our traditions of spirituality have been very, very conditioned by a sense of duality. Even if you look through history, there's a really great book by Jeremy Lent called The Patterning Instinct, which traces this kind of duality, this split, between the body and the mind, between the flesh and the soul, between the earthly, like profane realm and the realm of the abstract, beautiful ideas of Plato, and I feel like in that book he explains beautifully how, from the kind of Indo-Europeans coming into different parts of Europe and influencing the kind of earth-based cultures there, the Greeks, and their very dualistic ways of thinking and abstractions, coming into the kind of development of Christianity as an incubator for the scientific revolution, which further deepened that split. And so there's like this scientific kind of separation of like technology and the human mind here, and then the rest of the world as objects. And then in the spiritual kind of internal realm, there's this like body soul thing going on where we and you might go to a medicine circle and drink and experience God, and it's like, yeah, that's where the spirituality is, but then we go back to our fucked up lives. We're like, okay, now what do I do to integrate this? Tell me, ask me, I'll ask my facilitator, and the facilitator will say, like we said, well, what about some meditation? And eat your greens. How about that? And that's really the kind of stuff we were telling people because we didn't really what we've come to realize is that cultural healing is inseparable from the personal. So I feel like that was a massive takeaway for us.
Yeah, look, there are no doubt radical revisions of perception that need to occur on many levels. And what you're speaking to is something that I've just started exploring and detailing in my first book that is flowing through. And it's taking a deep look at how to reorient our perception to an animistic way of living and breathing, and taking a look at this dualism that has plagued many concepts. And we see it in the greater sphere of psychedelia, the sphere of, this idea of whether consciousness is local to the brain or non-local to the brain. Already there's that dualism between self and other, and then we see it in the Cartesian dualism between mind and body, and it's this either or. But what I am finding through my own experience is that it's not an exclusivity, it's an inclusivity. It's an integration of the mind and the body. It's realizing that consciousness is both local to the mind, local to the body, and also the recognition these are not separate. This is one integrated being, but consciousness is also non-local to the mind body. And we're in this constant relationship with self and other, which constantly is informing itself in this feedback loop. And we could go down that rabbit hole and really tease apart the intricacies of how we are perceiving self and other, and how to deepen our relationship with the natural world. But first, what I would love to ask is I would love to ask if there have been any particular experiences aside from your medicine work in the Amazon jungle that have acted as catalysts for you both to deepen into this path. So was your understanding of this something that developed based on previous experience of life as usual, and then coming to recognize the sentience of all of the plant life and the intelligence of the jungle and this expanded animistic way of perceiving? Or was it an integration of both to some degree? I'm curious to know about your relationship in this regard.
Question. Take it away.
I just wanted to get clear. So you're asking how it is we've kind of come to perceive into being animist consciousness, and how that came about?
Like what experiences might have catalyzed us to, open into that realization or understanding or path?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's really not been a kind of linear thing. I would say that on my personal journey, I was really naturally open to that way of seeing as a child, which I think a lot of children are. And I work with kids, and I see that that spark of kind of connecting with the livingness of the world very naturally occurring, unless we kind of condition them out of it at a young age, which I feel is happening younger and younger. But yeah, for me, I feel like it was a really kind of natural way of perceiving for a long time. And I think possibly because I had a really kind of wild upbringing in the bush in South Africa, and kind of very chilled parents who gave me a lot of time to just be outdoors in self-directed play. And I really feel like that's one of the ways that as young humans we begin to build that perception and connection. And I think, as is quite common, I won't speak for anyone else, but I know that the story is common from other people I've heard. As I kind of grew up and went into puberty, the stories of our culture, the separation stories, started to kind of press in more and more. I think particularly around puberty, where you're naturally wanting to kind of start resonating with the tribe more. Like in my early childhood, it didn't really matter so much what the bigger stories of my culture were. I was very much more being resonated by the wild environment that I was in most of the day. But as I kind of grew, I wanted to know what my peers were doing, and kind of, you know, as a teenager, you want to fit in, you want to be seen, you want to feel liked. And I feel like that kind of made me more, what's the word? Susceptible to the kind of stories of separation that were coming in. And so,
your dad was a bit of a...
Yeah, I have a beautiful family, and I'm so grateful. But my father is very atheist. He's very much like we're just meat puppets, and at the end of the life, that's the end, and it's just some like random luck that we all got here at all, and there is no meaning in any of it. Like he stands firmly in that story,
At the end, when you die, it's lights out, eh? And the worms just fucking eat you. And if you dare to believe anything else, you're an idiot. You're a fucking moron. He's a great guy, but he's also, he's got
he resonates that story in a strong way. And I feel like as a younger child, maybe because of my intellect he didn't feel the need to tell me that story as much. But as I grew older, it started coming in more. And so I think one of the things that kind of, it was one of those like had it lost it kind of things, where I started to get progressively more shut down. And then this actually resulted for me personally in a major crisis. I went through an existential crisis at 14 years old, because I had watched my grandmother get sick from cancer and pass away. And then I held my cat, who was one of my soulmates in this life. She passed away very suddenly and unexpectedly in my arms from a heart attack. And then I was also kind of awakening to my personal context of being born into the end stages of apartheid, and in the very first years of kind of post-apartheid struggle. And, it was the stark inequality was becoming clearer to me. It's something I didn't really notice when I was younger. And so basically like the hardships of life started pressing in, and the only framework that I had to make sense of it was this atheist Dawkins kind of framework. And it was really hard. It just caused this kind of existential anxiety in me, to the point where I was afraid to go to sleep at night, and having panics about dying and losing the ones that I loved every single night. And I was just really lucky to have a very good friend of mine who directed me to the plants. And so I actually participated in my first ayahuasca ceremony at 16 in Peru. And that totally, what?
No, they gave you a full cup.
Yeah, they gave me a full cup. It was a big cup. Yeah, and it totally, it helped me to kind of open back into what I was already feeling as a child and more. It gave me this incredible permission, I guess, that I needed to really root in what I feel is my natural perceptive lens. But it's not been easy. It's not like that was it, and then I've been like rooted in animism. It was not at all, like, and even now, we spent 5 years in the jungle. It's still not like that, it's very much a like falling into this kind of separation and disconnect. And then we have to work at kind of creating space for this interbeing and this like animate perceptive lens to take root, because I really feel like that lens is in many ways kind of more natural to us than this separation lens, but at the same time we're a very strong story that our culture is telling. And again, as we mentioned earlier, like the systems that I participate in every single day are forcing me into that in some ways, because I can, for example, go out in the garden and have like a total union experience with a passionflower and feel this communication and this kind of ecstasy of that that connection. And then I go to the grocery store and I buy my like tomatoes, which are also plants. They're in animist perception, they're also beings, but it's like what we call citizen mode. I like go into citizen mode, and it's like this disconnect, and I get my groceries, and everything's in plastic, and very rarely like am I able to kind of consciously bring that way of perceiving into those places. We're trying more and more, and doing our best to shop at markets and stuff like that. But like I'm busy, and sometimes I just like fall into a routine of disconnect, and that's kind of what I'm saying is like throughout the day, getting in the car to get to it. Like there's so many steps throughout my day where I fall into that citizen mode, and then kind of have to consciously awaken into what we call the elemental state, where you're feeling kind of reciprocal relationship with your world. And so that I would say plants is the one thing, but there's been many things. The work that Reconnects has been massive for both of us, and so many authors and teachers and experiences that have been really, really potent. And yeah, the time in the jungle, outside of the actual plant medicines themselves, the ayahuasca, I would love to speak to what was even more kind of magical for us, and really the kind of the hidden gold of the experience, which was spending time with people, the Shipibo indigenous people, who hold an animist view and practice this discipline of dieta. Like that was like instrumental, I think, for both of us in our path. But I'll let you.
Yeah. For me, I did grow up close to nature. I grew up in the Yarra Valley, but I think that similarly to Skye, I, being a young human, wanted to resonate with my culture, and kind of didn't have a choice to resonate with my culture. I feel like Skye has probably been a bit more self-directed in her life, kind of guided by that. Has listened to herself probably in an earlier stage. I feel like I had to go the long way around in a sense. So I, went to school, and then I went to university, and I studied law, and I studied some of my art subjects included skeptical philosophy, so I very much embraced the kind of separation thinking and the philosophy behind it, and took it for granted as being true. That as Charles Eisenstein describes it, I felt myself as a Cartesian mote of consciousness, looking at the eyes of a flesh robot, programmed by its genes to maximize reproductive self-interest. So I felt that was my reality. And so I worked as a corporate lawyer for a couple of years, and that was actually a really potent experience, to catalyze an existential crisis.
For sure.
Because I mean, I felt like that it was a stressful job, but it was like that was a concentration of this separation consciousness, which we can kind of flesh out a little bit more. I feel like we keep on talking about separation, this and that, and it's kind of it can be a bit amorphous. But that quote that I just gave from Charles Eisenstein about the mote of consciousness, the meat puppet kind of feeling, this sense that life, the story that I was living was kind of like, not in all moments, but there was this background belief, that kind of kept me shut in and separate from the world. Like the story that I was living was that everything is random. Maybe everything's determined. I went through a phase of believing that like kind of this kind of random reductionistic materialistic determinism, where everything is just particles, like impersonal forces, the sum of impersonal forces acting upon objects, and just like everything is just objects and it's just things, and the only thing that I know is real is kind of like my mind. This is like the kind of Descartes situation. And it's a really alienating story. I felt utterly disconnected from the world. I felt like a stranger in my own body. And I had a lot of deep emotional stuff going on, which I was not able to access. And so, I embraced this kind of alienated, disconnected way of being. And I thought, well, why not? I'm getting socially rewarded, and what else is there? But that drove me like so deep into it that I kept on thinking about dying, and I thought to myself as I was doing these long hours in this office, hanging out in the meat puppet, feeling like a kind of robotic reptile of some kind. That I don't want to die like this. There was this sense of, I know I'm going to die. It's going to happen, and this can't be it. If this is it, this is so. And so I found out about plant medicines because I was into looking. I started looking at myself with other kind of modalities, like the psycho-therapeutic journeying and that kind of thing, and I became a practitioner in that, and that started to open up the kind of personal pain inside of me. But I felt fundamentally that the story that I had from my culture about what it means to be a human being was still keeping me shut out from life. And at the time, I couldn't articulate any of this. I was just like, I'm depressed. And so I want help with my depression, And so I looked on the websites and stuff, and I did research, and I found, of course, these clever marketers, they like to say that ayahuasca heals depression, which is such a lot of crap. It's like, in some people, if you give something the title of depression, then maybe, yes, the ball of symptoms that you categorize as depression may go away. It happens. But it's so misleading to say that it heals depression. But for me, it worked to draw me in, because I got there, and after a few ceremonies and a lot of praying to the life that I didn't believe in, I had the experience I needed to have of essentially remembering the intelligence and beauty and aliveness and beingness of everything. And that kind of shattered my the hard ice, of this kind of delusional story that I had inherited from the culture and never questioned really seriously. And then, as Skye was saying, living with the Shipibos and doing this practice of Dieta, which is essentially building relationships with other than humans, But I just wanted to emphasize that, like, for me, the plant medicine and working with the Shipibos helped to remember something that is innate, that the world is actually alive. The world is not a dead thing. The world is not a machine. And the deepest parts of me came kind of woke up again, and there was this bone, soul deep kind of relief that I knew this, this is like something I'm remembering. This is not something I'm interpreting. It's remembering, which is a way higher order of knowledge than an interpretation. So that's kind of my deal. And we can speak about other stuff, about the other influences, the integration work, the reconnects and that kind of thing. But that's kind of, I would say, my series of influences.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot there that we could unpack and get into. Firstly, Skye, it seems like from a very young age you were being initiated by descent in a multitude of ways. And Helm, when you're speaking to separation, and we could certainly tease apart that to greater degrees, but one of the things that I thought of was a quote by a man that I came across almost a decade ago, and I'm sure you know the name, Graham Hancock, and it's quite a well-known quote. He speaks about us as a species with amnesia. And I share similar sentiments when you speak to the need for us to reseed culture and create the space so that we can cultivate these ways of relating to the natural world, not going to the supermarket and just picking the tomatoes and seeing them as just a inanimate resource for us to consume, but really cultivating these new ways of perception to see all of life as living and breathing in all its many shapes and forms. And I would love to deepen into the practice of dieta that you both spoke to. So you guys spent, 5 years in apprenticeship to the indigenous Shipibo curanderos, and you had mentioned to me in previous emails that they taught you a framework for relating with the other than humans, and I'm curious to know if this framework is inclusive of the practice of dieta and how also singing Icaros weaves into this. So perhaps we can converse on this and maybe a basic definition to act as a launching point for those that have little reference to what it is that we're speaking out. Might be a great place to start, and then expanding on dieta and Icaros from there.
Yeah. Oh, this is precious part of our path. So we were in apprenticeship to the Mahua Lopez lineage of Shipibo curanderos. So for those who don't know, a curandero is the kind of regional, Amazonian regional name for plant spirit healer or like plant doctor or shaman. We might call them a shaman in our culture. And it was a full-time apprenticeship, and at the same time that we were learning from them, we were also facilitating retreats for a really well-known ayahuasca healing center, and getting to participate in and assist our teachers in the healing of hundreds of people, so it was a really kind of intensive, profound process. And I think, I won't speak for Helm, but for me, I thought I was going down there to kind of learn how to run ayahuasca ceremonies and to work with ayahuasca, and we were, and that was absolutely a part of it, but it actually ended up being such a small part of it. Like, I think for me, one of the things that was kind of most impactful was this thing that we call plant dieta. And so plant dieta it's a kind of discipline or practice that the curanderos engage in order to what would you call it? Like, kind of build their healing medicine box, in a sense. It's hard to describe, but they're kind of like going into the jungle, spending time in isolation and silence, with the exception of maybe their teacher or someone who's helping them every couple of days, might bring them some food, something like that. And you start the process off by fasting for a number of days. So it can be anywhere from 2 to 10 days on average, total fasting. And during that time, you are ingesting a preparation of a plant, not a psychedelic plant, a plant that you're intending to learn from. And the plants are, in this sense, seen as teachers. They're like recognized for their ability to come into relationship with us if we engage them in the right ways, and to form a connection or a communion, and then start kind of working through us. And so this process is how curanderos are able to kind of build their medicinal potency. It's like with every plant that you build a connection with, you're adding medicine to your medicine chest that you can then go and do healing with. And so that's the kind of like process in a nutshell, but it ended up being so much more than that for us. And I think particularly because we're Westerners coming with this kind of wounded psyche where, as you know, everything we've just described, where we've been kind of conditioned to see the world as kind of in this objectifying utilitarian way, and also in this kind of flattened one-dimensional way. And so the way we describe it is kind of that in our culture we've become really oriented to surfaces, and we've lost our ability to kind of sense the metaphysical, imaginal dimensions to our world. And that's part of this kind of innate perceptive consciousness of animism that we've been speaking about. And I think in our culture, when we say the word animism, often a lot of us think of projecting human qualities onto the world outside. I think that's kind of a way that a lot of people conceive of animism, whereas for us it was really like this practice of dieta and being with the Shipibo people and being kind of resonated by their culture, which is so different from our culture in the way that the world is perceived, is that you're actually like, you're strengthening and developing your ability to engage with the dimensionality of the world. Like a plant, in this way of seeing, is, let's say, you have an oak tree. It's an oak tree in the way that we perceive it. It's also this kind of process without like defined boundary, if you want to see it in the systems way of seeing it, in the complexity way of seeing it. And then if you want to see it in the kind of dimensional animist lens, there's a beingness and a sentience and an intelligence to it. And if you want to go even more deeper, you can go into the visionary sense, where it is a world in and of itself. Mm-hmm. And so there's these layers to engaging a tree, whereas like most of us will walk up to a tree and just be like, oh, it's a tree, you know, or maybe you're like, someone's like, oh yeah, you know, it's good to reclaim animist perception, and you're like, hi tree, you know, like, which is a great way to start. I'm not saying you mustn't do that. That's an awesome way to start. But what I'm saying is there's so many layers to like being in relationship with this tree, and it can go so deep. And so Dieta is creating this container where you are intentionally creating a space, getting rid of all other distractions. And part of the reason why we're in isolation and silence and getting rid of the distractions is because, or this is what I feel anyway, that Dieta, like as we were mentioned before, we're wired to be kind of connected to the humans. And so when you're around other people, whether you want it or not, you're constantly being pulled into like human consciousness, like personality, like the personality keeps on getting triggered again and again and again, whereas we need to create a space where we can actually like drop the human face and come into this like more porous space where you can now begin engaging these layers of relationship or connection. And the Dieta is that, it's this container, and there's certain practices and rituals that we would engage in within that container to be able to deepen that process. But yeah, so that was just completely changed my entire way of seeing the world. You know, even though I had the seeds of that as a child, and I feel like I naturally sensed the livingness of my world as a kid before I kind of had that disconnect in puberty, it gave me a container to go even deeper than that and go right into the world of plants. So that's kind of Dieta. And then Icaros is an extension of Dieta, because one of the reasons you're doing the Dieta is to kind of create this medicinal partnership with the plant, where in the Dieta, you're kind of also making a kind of contract or agreement where you're agreeing to become part plant. Like, these plants become a permanent part of your physiology going forward. And through this partnership in the ceremonial context, we're able to start singing Icaros, which, you know, like you could call them medicine songs or sacred songs. They're so different from your average song. You know, like our teachers would always say, don't sing por gusto in the ceremony. Like, don't just sing because it's a song because it sounds nice. It could be even the most beautiful song, but that's different from an Icaro. An Icaro is a song that is the plant. It's not representing the plant. It's not symbolic of the plant. You know, I'll sing about heartbreak, or I'll sing, it is the tree singing through you. And there's this kind of emergent, like the song is an emergent quality that results as the partnership between you and the plant that you've been working with. And through this, you're able to kind of, your worlds come together, and you're able to kind of affect the, how would you call it, the kind of vibrational patterns of the person that you're working with. So when people come to you for healing, their illnesses have a pattern. And when you sing to them, you're singing a kind of corrective pattern over it. You're helping to kind of resonate them into a healthier pattern through the song. And it's not a passive process. It's a partnership as well. Like, the person who's receiving it has to be open to that and engage it with you. And you can obstruct that from happening. And so it's such a sacred process. And it's like, it's so deeply intimate. Singing in Icaro is one of the most intimate union experiences I have ever had. It's ecstasy, actually, because it's like, I feel like on some level, this animist perception kind of feeds this part of ourselves that we don't even know we're starving for. I feel like this connection with the more than human world is food for our psyches and our souls, in the same way that water and food are food for the body. Like, when I'm not in that, I'm starving for it. Like, this connection, it doesn't have to be coming out as Icaros, but that's one of the kind of, you know, fruits of that process of connection. So yeah, it's a total incredible process. Yeah. And ayahuasca can be a part of that. And that can also, all of that can happen without ayahuasca. You don't need ayahuasca for that. It's certainly, I would say, for those of us coming from Western culture, it's very helpful, because I feel like, because we're so conditioned into this one-dimensional, flattened way of consciousness, that ayahuasca can really help to open you up to the dimensionality again. And when you start working with the plants, after a while, you can perceive it without the ayahuasca. You don't need it anymore. Although, you know, it has its own gifts in medicine. Yeah. Did you want to add anything?
I just wanted to riff off what you were saying about feeling nourished by an experience of the livingness of the world, you know, that the animism, because I think it's really important to underscore that we, like, didn't just appear here at birth as a blank slate. We are the product of the entire history of the evolution of humans, firstly. And of course, before that, if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, as you say, we're a product of 4 odd billion years of evolution. But if we look at the time that we've been as humans, about 95% of that time, we have been in relationship with the world. We have been deeply connected with the livingness of the world. It hasn't even been something we've had to think of. And our cultures have sprung up and supported that because of survival, partly. You know, it was highly adaptive to know, you know, the animals' tracks, to be able to follow them, you know, miles and miles, and to be able to kind of pick up their scent on the wind, and to read the clouds, and to read the landscape, and to feel the livingness. Like it was all absolutely necessary. Like we've kind of evolved in such a throughout history. All of these groups, these kind of tribal groups that we were in, so much of those groups, those tribes were animist, were able to live deeply with the livingness of the world. So I just wanted to emphasize that in my rambling way, because I I like forgot that. I wasn't aware of that or something. Someone didn't remind me of that in school. So when I came to, I was, and then I'm like feeling bereft. I'm like, why the fuck am I feeling bereft? And I feel despair, and I feel shut out from life. Well, wait a second. My DNA is wired to know that that is like absolutely essential for my fullness of being. That animism is essential for the fullness of my being, and it's a grief that we carry around with us, I think. Um, so I know that that's tangential in a sense to what you were asking about, the dieta and stuff, but just picture me down there with having these wild experiences of like connection, but then kind of in the meantime, like journaling to myself, do I really believe what the fuck's going on? Like I studied skeptical philosophy of thought. Like just dig that. Like I was like so in that world that I was like half not believing what I was experiencing, and kind of like doubting everyone else's experience. What the fuck are these people talking about? And then I'll like have this experience. I'm like, oh, no, it was really confusing. And I actually say like I want to tell this story because I haven't like arrived at like a destination, and then like perceive everything as animist. No way. But I feel in my bones. I've remembered enough times now that I have a faith in it. And if I can do it, anyone can do it. I tell you that. That's what I wanted to share. Because the most skeptical, like that skeptical philosophy shit, fucks with your head. The basic skeptical thesis is you cannot prove that you have hands. So how about you can't prove that you have hands? Why? This thing of like not trusting my physical experience. So anyway, that's my rant over. But yeah, there it is.
There it is. Yeah, again, there's so much to unpack there, and I feel like if we had more time, we could really sit down and flesh these out in a way that gives respect to a lot of the nuances and complexities in the themes that we're touching on. But obviously, when we're engaging in a conversation, a digital conversation as that for a show, we don't have the time to get into all of it. But look, to try and summarize all that both of you have shared in my own somewhat concise, maybe somewhat rambling way, is that within the context of being in this disconnected separation society and culture, there is such an absolute importance in decolonizing the mind and opening up our perception beyond the linearity and the logic and the rationalism. And how do we do that? Well, that's a gateway that we could enter, but we do that through a starting point is, well, there's lots of starting points, but perhaps something as simple as spending more time in nature, really immersing oneself in nature. And there are ways that we can deepen into that through various rites of passage, such as medicine work, vision quest, the wilderness vigil. But to be able to perceive the multidimensionality that you're speaking to when we're in communication or on a deeper level in communion, this more intimate way of relating with the world, it's absolutely important for us to put ourselves in situations where we are not confined to this human-centric way of perceiving ourselves to be. And when you guys are talking about Dieta, and it seems like there is a necessary interweaving of human consciousness and plant consciousness that allows this deep communion where we are learning the essence of the plant, which comes through as the Icaro, which then transmits this it transmits this vibratory frequency so that we can affect change in someone else's, do we want to call it physiology? It's more than physiology. It's their energetic sense of being. And when I see that, or when I try to pick this apart, we're electrochemical vibratory beings. And science is now even coming up with frequency devices to be able to modulate our state of being in a multitude of ways. So we can kind of, if we wanted to try and look at it from some sort of scientific lens for the hardline kind of people out there, we can start to look at these devices and how they're affecting change, and how these frequencies that the plants emit are also affecting change in a similar level but a different way. So there's somewhat of my reflections after hearing you both speak about that, and there's so many other threads that I would love to speak on, and maybe I'll name a few that might be interesting to go down and let you guys kind of weave in and out from there. But I'm very curious about your relationship with passionflower, the jungle orchids, the bees, the lyrebirds, the fungi, the Amanita muscaria, and how this weaves into everything. But I would also love to touch on any pertinent points relating to deep ecology, which is essentially, it's inextricably intertwined with everything that we've been talking about. I'm just not sure we have language specifically as deep ecology yet. And, maybe we can weave in some of the ins and outs of the work that reconnects, and how you were initiated into deep ecology with John Seed, and how grief and activism ties into it. And I would love to also touch on some practical points that we can leave listeners with to be able to deepen into this path of relating that we're speaking to. So there's a lot to unpack even within that. So I'll pass the ball back to you guys.
Yeah, thank you. It's just so much. I was actually saying to Helm the other day, sometimes I feel overwhelmed by these conversations, because they are like all these threads, and I want to do them justice. I want to have the space to kind of unfold into the nuances of all of this, and give the right language to it. And anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge that that's something that's always present for me when I have a kind of interview or a talk. That I just need to kind of surrender to the fact that what medicine is shared is what's meant to be shared. Yeah.
Just throw up some shiny chunks, won't you, babe?
Yeah. Okay, where to begin? There's so many threads that we could go down. Well, I would love to share, I guess, some stories of as you mentioned, the passion flowers. I think for me that was like a really big part of my path personally. So when we were down in Peru, I definitely I see the danger in kind of speaking to the Dieta and the Icaros and all the absolute amazing insights and transmissions and medicine that we received. And we've both said many times that we also don't want to create some romantic idea. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect. Down there, it was actually really challenging for us in some ways. And there was this, we were watching the kind of culture of separation and colonial mindset coming in through us just being there, coming to seek medicine and healing, but at the same time all these tourists coming to drink ayahuasca and learn from these people is sometimes in some ways also embedding the parts of our culture that I don't want to go there. So there was that tension. And also in many ways our teachers were kind of reflecting back to us also the sickness that is spread, the sickness of the mind that the Native American people call the witiko, a week ago, and we saw that happening in real time, and that was hard. And there was also just interpersonal challenges. So I also just wanted to name that so that people don't get this false idea that it was just perfect and rainbows. And so this leads into my story about the passion flower, because I was going through a kind of crisis of faith down there, about halfway through the apprenticeship, I would say, about 2 or 3 years in, where we had some interpersonal challenges with one of our teachers, and
shit got pretty dark.
Shit got dark. Yeah, we have multiple teachers, and it was a difficulty with one of them, and as a result, it was also just bringing up this feeling of, well, I'm not Shipibo, nor will I ever be, and this is not my culture, and I wasn't born here, and kind of feeling this desire to learn and go as deep as I could in this tradition, but also coming up against this feeling of wanting to find something that was more authentic to me as a friggin' white chick, South African European ancestor, all of this. And so in the kind of depths of this particular descent, of which there have been many in my life, it seems, I had this experience. I would go wandering in the jungle. We lived in this place called the Mashana National Park, which is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And it's also, as far as I know, I think it's actually the most biodiverse region on the planet, this particular national park that we were in. Absolutely, like the energy, the primal energy coming from that place was just medicine in and of itself. And so I would go on these long jungle walks, and on this particular day I was feeling quite deflated. My icaros the months before weren't flowing so well, I think as a result of these interpersonal challenges that were coming up and struggles. And so I was on this walk, and I found a wild jungle passion flower. And I actually smelt the flower before I saw it. And I'd never seen one or smelt one before. And it was like this, like celestial, like heavenly smell. And then I kept walking, and then I saw it. And maybe I can send you a photo of it or something. It was unlike any passion flower I've ever seen before or since. Like, the wild jungle passion flowers are incredible and stronger smelling than a lot of the passion flowers that grow elsewhere in the world. And I was just like completely taken aback by this flower. It was like meeting an alien, that's how I felt. And I was just like, wow, who are you, and staring and just feeling this real kind of touch of inspiration, or like, I don't know, it pierced me. And we had a ceremony that night, so I kind of spent some time with the flower, and then I went back to the Maloka, and we got ready for ceremony, and we went into ceremony, and in the ceremony the flower came to me and basically told me that I need to enter into a kind of apprenticeship with it, and taught me how to make flower essences. And so I had never made a flower essence before. I'd never used a flower essence before. We were living in the jungle. We didn't have internet. We didn't have even phone signal. So there was like completely off grid. So I had no way to learn about how to make them. And it gave me like full instructions. And so the next day I went out, and I went and entered into this ritual process that I was kind of taught how to do in the ceremony the night before, and took one flower. Well, actually, I took two flowers, and I made the essence. And on the way back to the Maloka to make my flower essence, I came past our mapacho plants, which is the jungle tobacco, and it was flowering. And I had never seen, up till that moment, I had never seen them in flower. And then the ayahuasca vine that was growing behind our Maloka was also flowering, all on the same day. And I had never seen either of those flower before. It had been the first time I'd ever seen an ayahuasca flower in my life as well. And so I ended up making an essence of all three of them that day: a passion flower, the mapacho, and ayahuasca. And that began this kind of whole new path for me. And I started to do dietas with flowers, which is not something we were ever taught to do with the Shipibos. It wasn't I'm sure maybe there are some people that do it, but we had certainly never met anyone who had, and our teachers had never done it. And it became a kind of self-directed learning process. I was still under the tutelage of my Shipibo teachers, but the flowers took over as kind of my primary guides, and it opened up this whole world for me. My Icaros completely changed, like chalk and cheese. Like the language changed. I stopped only singing, and up till that point we were singing only in Shipibo. So I was having to learn Shipibo in order to sing, whereas now I started to sing in Shipibo, but then also the flowers gave me a language to sing in. So I was weaving the two together. I don't even know how to begin. I entered into the universe of the flowers, and I felt completely changed in the way that I was working with myself and with the people that were coming down. And so this led a few months later to me encountering these incredibly rare jungle orchids that grow in this like one little tiny spot, like nowhere else that we know of. And as far as we know, this orchid hasn't even been named. But one of the community members, who's a really good friend of ours, loves orchids, and he would take me on these long hikes into like jungle, like water like up to your hips, and like you're going through the mosquitoes and the leeches, and get to this amazing spot where the soil is really different from the surrounding area. Like there's nothing else like it. It's very hot, quartzite soil. And all the plants in this tiny little area of the jungle are almost entirely endemic to that area and nowhere else. So it's like very rare, all the plants and all the animals in this little area. And that was kind of like the parting gift before we left the jungle, this meeting of this orchid. And I ended up having like the most profound transmission from the orchids that night, again in ceremony, and felt like the jungles was kind of, I don't know, crowning me in orchids before leaving. And the very next day I had this experience, which I won't go into, it's a very long story, but essentially one of our participants had a crisis, quite a major crisis, and I was there helping this person. And as the crisis hit its peak and I thought that this person might be like in trouble and we might have to take them to town to seek medical help, all these bees came. Like different bees, like bumblebees and black jungle bees, and they started flying around his head. And as that started happening, I was like, this is happening in real life. Like this kind of feeling of like a pop and a steam coming from this man who was in a crisis. Like I thought he was going to have a stroke, like something was happening. And then the bees dispersed as that kind of pop happened. And then we were both just sitting in this like no mind ecstasy for
kind of samadhi kind of thing.
Like a kind of samadhi state that felt like the bees had somehow been connected to that and the orchids the night before, and it was just this most tremendous farewell from the jungle. Like this was just before we left, and I really feel like the flowers were instrumental to me kind of finding a path with the plants that felt more true to me. And there's so many stories that go off. We could do a whole podcast on stories. So that's my little piece. I don't know if you want to share anything about the orchids. I mean the mushrooms.
Connections.
Yeah.
Firstly, just let me jump in there, Helm, before you get started. I just want to say that is incredible, and it goes to show that there is magic to be found if we follow the silken thread of mystery. And you also speak to the importance of finding our own way as well. And I know that many of us are navigating this process of reconciling where and how we fit in, especially when we have a connection or a background to cultural or ancestral traditions that aren't necessarily in alignment to our own culture or our own ancestry. So, like you said, that's a whole other piece to explore right there. But just acknowledging that before you jump in, Helm, with any interesting stories about the fungi or the lyrebird or anything else.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I will share a little, but we dieted a lot of plants when we were in the jungle, but one of the ones that I want to share about now that seems to be ripe for sharing is a plant called Chirixinongo, and it's a tree, and the Shipibos use it for a number of different things, but it's particularly good for kind of uh, nerve issues and the quality, unblocking the quality of cold. So they say that we would think of it as stagnation in the body and the emotions and the mind and that the whole system basically. Um, so say if you can't get it up or you've got like circulation problems or something like that, you might get a little remedy of Chirixinongo to take a couple of times a day, and it helps to restore that flow in the system. So I dieted this plant, and I really was blown away by the way that it unblocked the cold in a very profound emotional way for me. We had this funny thing that would happen when we gave it as a plant medicine to people on retreats, where they would take it and they would feel all kind of tingly, and that would be, and our teachers would be like, aha, yeah, it's just kind of opening the system a little bit, and we'd be like, okay, cool, and they would all kind of enjoy themselves a little bit high and kind of so forth, and then it was quite common for people's shit to come up and to start projecting on everyone else. And so the times that usually we observed, the times that we gave Chirixinongo, it was quite common for people to really become a bit dark for a day or two afterwards. But this effect turned out to be, for me, like a huge teaching in really touching down some of my deepest wounding and trauma. And really kind of uncoiling and revealing to me deep shame. And so I was not expecting that at all. I was kind of like, I'm dieting this plant for wisdom and for energy and
Powerful Icaros.
yeah, powerful Icaros and so forth as per the tradition. And what actually happened is that, because I suppose, as we were saying before, there's not really a separation between the blockages in me and my capacity to let energy and other intelligences flow through me, and my capacity to be alive in the world and to be of service. They're all the same thing. So the plants understand that, unlike me apparently. So this unblocking of the cold and revealing of shame is just really, really profound. And it's an ongoing kind of relationship with working with the stuff that this plant has revealed to me. But yeah, I just wanted to share that was one of the most profound things that happened. Like, apart from the animistic reconnections and the visionary experiences and stuff, in terms of healing my depression, a lot of that happened through my relationship with the Chirixinongo, kind of really bringing up the core of what I had been running from my whole life, and helping me to know that I have the strength of awareness to be with it, and I don't have to let it control me from behind the scenes all the time. So yeah, that's one story. Yeah, I mean, I could go on with the lyrebird and so forth, but I think let's keep it flowing.
Yeah, the power and the potency of the plants certainly cannot be understated when it comes to their assistance for our own psycho-emotional, physiological, energetic, spiritual, all-encompassing, integrated, holistic health. And I don't know when it was, maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, I have also communed with Chirixinongo through the process of Dietas. So yeah, I can relate with many of the things that you're touching on and have a very special affinity with that particular plant as well.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So I love this question that you posed in the email that you had sent me, Skye. And this question here is, and perhaps this is where we can slowly start to weave perhaps somewhat full circle or spiral back around in a sense. The question is, how do we become fully human and really deeply participate in this life that we're in while enhancing the experience for all members of our Earth community?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a question that we hold, and I feel like it's definitely not a question that we've answered, but it's one of those. I'm a big fan of a man called Daniel Christian Wall. His work. He's a specialist, I suppose you could say, in designing regenerative cultures, and he speaks a lot to the importance of living the questions as opposed to needing the answers, you know, in this kind of way that like holding questions like this catalyzes different ways of thinking and different ways of being. And I think this is a kind of question that we've both held and have been kind of letting work on us for some years now. And I think that so much of what we do is kind of a natural response to this deeper desire to be fully human, you know, to reclaim what it really means to be a human in coherent relationship with the wider web of life. And so, yeah, there's no hard and fast answer to that, but everything that we've been speaking about has been a part of that journey for us. One of them is very much this process of shifting into the kind of wider sense of self, the animist perception, reclaiming this ecological sense of self.
Yeah, which all ties into this new paradigm of work that you're kind of both involved in, which is this whole sphere of deep ecology and the work that reconnects, and also with your previous experience with Amazonian curanderismo, and how this all coalesces to form what it is that you're both bringing to the world.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I think for us, one of the things that's happened is since we've left the jungle, we've kind of really been diving into this work of the work that reconnects. And the work that reconnects, for those who don't know it, it's also in Australia, it's called deep ecology. They're the same thing. It's different names for the same thing. So in Australia, the kind of main teacher of it is John Seed. But in the world, Joanna Macy is recognized as one of the primary root teachers of the work that reconnects. And it's this incredibly eloquent technology for helping us to shift into this wider sense of self through a process called the spiral. And yeah, I really feel that this body of work is helping us in conjunction with the work that we were doing in Peru and the practices that were transmitted to us there, and this work of really kind of building allyship and relations with the other than humans, bringing the two together has been just phenomenal for us. I mean, it's given us a kind of framework and language to help us anchor so much of what we received in Peru directly, and given a kind of system along with practices and teachings that help us to channel so much of what we were given there but didn't really have language for into a system to help shift into being. Like that's the kind of like goal of this body of work, of the work that reconnects, and it's really also what we see to be the kind of fruit of the Dieta process and working with the plants in the framework that we approach it with. There's many ways to approach Dieta and plant work. It certainly doesn't always result in a sense of interbeing, but that's how we're approaching that work, and they really are so resonant and tied together. And I think when we first arrived back here in Australia, well, for me it was immigrating, but Helmut was coming back because he's Australian. There was such a a sense of lostness because we've been so deeply immersed in this magical world of interconnection and like surrounded by a culture that sees that as important and like the experiences we're having as valid and yeah, just the healing that happened to these wounds of the psyche that I speak to were so immense. But then going from there and then coming into Australia, where it's just really in many ways the opposite of that, you know, and now finding a way to try and grow these like very tender shoots of into being in this cannibal economy, you know, that's the soil that we're in here, you know, this soil of objectification and utilitarian view of plants in the world at large. It was hard, and also feeling this immense pressure of, all right, well, we were in the jungle and we got this incredible system transmitted to us, but that system grew out of the context of the Amazon jungle, you know, in response to the community of the Shipibo people and their particular needs. It was absolutely profound, necessary, but now we're in a different place. And like the medicine can't look the same here. And so, of course, we'd been given permission to spread the medicine and do what we do, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel right. It was like, that's the jungle medicine, and now we're here and we're in a different land, and it would feel almost kind of out of integrity somehow to just go ahead and just start offering
Copy paste.
these things. And so we really went on like quite another descent process. So much grief, and I really see the last 3 years as our kind of like apprenticeship with the wound of separation in many ways. We really kind of became a lot more familiar with the nuances and were able to language it more, but in the kind of depth of this place of feeling like, what next and what are we about now, and like really like feeling the pain, you know. I think Tom and I were articulating it a few days ago that when we were in Peru, all of these parts of us that were like dying to be nourished, like I was speaking before, we were kind of receiving this deep nourishment of relationship with the other than human and the more than human world. Coming back into this context, because we'd had that, we were now feeling the pain more acutely, I would say, than a lot of people who live here all the time, who don't really know. They know on a deep level what's missing, but they maybe have never really spoken it or articulated it. And so it was like raw. It hurt so much. And in this place, we randomly, through chance, signed up for a deep ecology workshop with John Seed, and it was phenomenal. It was so profound, and so much of what we'd been learning and so much of what we wanted to kind of offer through our work with the plants, but the channels weren't really feeling open, like, was kind of reflected to us in this body of work. And we were like, holy moly, like this is just so profound. And yeah, from there we kind of just went into working with him at every opportunity that we could, and just helping him organize retreats when he was coming down, and just I went into full-on apprenticeship mode, reading everything that I could, on signing up for online courses, and just really kind of taking in this framework. And yeah, one of the things that Joanna Macy says is, and I'll actually read it to you because it's so beautiful, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. What does it mean to be a living part of a living whole, like a cell in the body of earth? Such a question, when we pursue it, brings us back to ancestral wisdom. And that question kind of really kind of sums up, I feel, in essence, like what the work that Reconnects is about, and what the work that we were doing in Peru is about, and our kind of whole orientation and framework is like remembering what it means to be a cell in the living body of earth. How does that And we don't have answers to that. That's what's happening. That's the process that's happening now. That is the decolonization of the mind. Is the living that question, really.
And I'll say as well that for people that are interested in plant medicine, plants are not the answer in a vacuum. Plant, like all plant medicine use has arisen in a cultural context, and I think that what's so important is for us who are interested in plants and other states of consciousness and long-term transformation, and to give back, and everything um, is to learn how to metabolize and implement new forms of culture, um, and we need maps for that. At least I do. Like I came to the Shipibos pretty lost, and kind of culturally bereft, and I think like it's a bit of a fine line sometimes between learning from some people and then appropriating their culture, and wanting to just kind of copy paste kind of thing. And so yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that for me, what it means to be fully human is really like, okay, I'll just put it like this: living psychedelically, living psychedelically, not having an experience of love, but learning how to love. And I feel like we can have these transmissions with the plants, but we need frameworks, we need language, we need culture, we need maps. This is the answer to the vexing question of how do we integrate our experiences. We need new culture, and we take inspiration from indigenous cultures. Of course, we learn from indigenous people when we can, and I think we have to recognize that, like us, our background is Western civilization. So what was really beautiful for me was to come into contact with these maps with the work that reconnects. Work that reconnects. I'm not too hot on the name; it's a bit of a mouthful. Deep ecology has its own like associations to that, but that work provides really ensouled, inspired, well-channeled maps that we can learn how to live, psychedelically, live more in the animist way. And what I would call as being fully human is like a return to the, um, a kind of whole organism return to the awe of our earthly condition. And to inspire the awe again, and I guess the terror and the grief as well, but to really be alive, And I think that we don't do this work, or we don't participate in this movement because we feel like it's the right thing to do. That's not enough. We feel moved by the larger Earth system, as some of its parts. The larger system regulates itself through the feeling of its parts, which are us. And so our felt response is to participate in this movement. Why? Because we feel alive when we do. This is where life is. This is where reality is. And so I just wanted to emphasize that, because I don't think it's enough at this point to inspire people by saying, look how fucked up everything is. I think that there's enough information out there for people to know this already. If information were enough, if the horror of things were enough, we would have done it already. But what I want to say is that this animism stuff, this work that reconnects deep ecology frameworks, this working with the plants in the way that we've been doing, and connecting with other than humans, and reclaiming animals, all of this is sexy. And it's sexy in the sense of like it leads to more life. That's the hook for us, ape creatures. So we got to get a hook. So it feels really good, and there's a lot of joy there. So yeah.
Yeah, look, it's a deep, deep vortex that we can get sucked into and travel down. And something that I wanted to revisit was a sweeping comment I made when I was talking about one place to start if we're recognizing that feeling of being disconnected, lost, that feeling of separateness, and we want to reconnect, we want to try and return to some integrated state of humanness in relation to a living, breathing world, I said connection to nature. And look, such a superficial, sweeping statement, connection to nature, because it's, yes, it's one place to start, but all of this, there is such depth of multi-dimensionality to it. So when I'm saying connection to nature, what I mean is such an expansive web of ideas, concepts, ways of living and breathing, because we're talking about self. We're talking about connecting to becoming more aware of our mental cogitations and the flow of energy and emotions that are running through us on an individual level. And it's dealing with all of this to get down to stages where we can feel the grief and start to process all this underlying grief. And it is the initiations by descent. It is the hero's journeys. Obviously, it's the work that reconnects as well. This is one pathway for people to go down. It's tuning into these re-envisioned, revitalized ways of perceiving self and other in this interconnected sphere. And I don't know if it's possible to give a succinct answer here, because it is so multidimensional and complex and nuanced. But for those who are feeling a sense of overwhelm, and I certainly am not excluded from this, because it's such deep work that we seem to have been initiated into during this time. There's a lot of overwhelm to carry. And what would you say? What would you say is a place, like an entry point for people? I mean, the one place, obviously, is everything that you're talking about. It's the work that reconnects. It's deep ecology. But if someone's listening to this right now and it's like, man, I've got a lot of work to do. Then what? What's the next step after listening to this conversation that we've had?
Yeah, that's a good question. For me, it's making space for the grief. That's one of the big things. I feel like one of the things that's so overwhelming to our systems is that because we're in this hyper individual culture that hasn't got really a language or a kind of space for these big feelings, like we are our world. If we really kind of take that on, if we recognize that actually we are our world and our world is on fire, it hurts to be on fire. The fact is, like, if we're going to come back into felt sense connection with our world, then that means that we also need to come into connection with all the ways that it's hurting right now. And so I would say one of the first places to start is to start kind of looking at the stories or the conditioning that we have around feeling, and finding collective containers or others who you can be witnessed in your grief. I think that's one of the big things that's really missing for a lot of us right now, and that's resilience. Is really creating those structures in yourself to hold yourself when these things come up. But one of the teachers that we really love, Francis Weller, speaks a lot to ritual grief, like ritual grieving in containers, because a lot of the time what's happening, and like, because this is grief for the world, and we're feeling grief that of this, like, it's huge what we're feeling the whole world. We need an extended nervous system of others to be able to hold this, and that's really hard for us because at the moment most of us are in very kind of isolated lifestyles where we have been told that feeling pain just in your own personal life, like, we don't have a good relationship with what we'd call the dark emotions, but even larger than that, like, pain for the world is not even something that's acknowledged to be something that is even a thing for a lot.
Yes, and even if we do feel all these sensations of discomfort or all the unpleasantries, all the challenges, all the overwhelm, there is that tendency to resist or disconnect, to not want to feel it, to see it as something that's way too big and we don't want to touch that. So yeah, obviously pointing to the importance of having these ritualistic containers.
Yeah, to feel like you're companioned in that, because it is too big for all of us to hold on our own in our isolated little bubbles, like me going around my routine of waking up and going to the shops and doing this on my own and trying to like somehow metabolize like the great unraveling of of civilization and like the planetary support systems. You need more. You need more connection for that. So yeah, I would say that's a really good place to start. And the work that reconnects is something that provides a framework for that. As I mentioned before, it's a really kind of eloquent system called the spiral, where we kind of resource in the beginning with gratitude, but as we mentioned, a kind of deeper gratitude, a kind of in-soul gratitude, and then that leads into this next step of turning towards our grief and going through both personal processes and grief group processes that help us to bring these things through. And like in the grief rituals that we've held, a really common response afterwards is, shit, I didn't even know that was there. I didn't even know how much grief was there, because like and Francis really speaks to this beautifully. We have a very intelligent system. If we don't have the capacity to turn towards it, it can be stuffed really far down. And a lot of people don't even know what's happening until they have the container for that to start emerging. And it is so unbelievably potent to recognize, that we're actually all we're all in this together. That's like another kind of doorway into being that we could go down. Yeah, but these grief rituals are absolutely essential to this process of work that reconnects, and this process of looking at the ways that we've framed feeling and what it means to feel, and how important it is to feel, because in the work that reconnects, feeling, particularly the dark emotions, but all of them, are seen as the way that the larger system communicates with us. Like if we're part of this larger system, like systems require a fluid and responsive feedback loop in order to maintain coherence. And so if we're shutting down the feeling sense, then we're not able to be responsive to our world. And so Helen and I really feel like so much of what we're offering is a kind of like innate and spontaneous response to awakening to the sickness, like it's kind of like, it sounds dark maybe, but it's beautiful. Like I feel like even though it hurts, when I feel my world and what's wrong, then I kind of instinctively know how to be in response to that. And that's really so much of what this work is about. It's about unblocking that feeling sense and coming into a kind of fluid relationship with it, which naturally acts as a doorway to that interconnection. Because as we mentioned with the animism, if you really want to come into a deep embodied feeling sense connection of knowing through your body that the world is alive and sentient and intelligent, then you need to be able to kind of confront the violence of the culture that is inflicted on this living and sentient world every single day. It's asking a lot, so.
But what I will say is also that, just getting back to the sexiness I was mentioning before, that whenever we've allowed the grief, and that pain and the heartache to come through, what has remained is always a kind of joy, as in not like the kind of happy joy McJoy or something, but what Stephen Buno, who's also one of our inspirations and teachers, defines joy as the healthy functioning of the organism.
Yeah.
That's it. To feel that is such a relief. It's really such a relief. And And then what comes afterwards is naturally, oh yeah, of course, we're starting to remember this reconnection again. I'm overwhelmed because I think I'm laboring under a misconception that I'm alone in all of this, and that I'm just this mortal like speck of nothingness that's just going to disappear, and I have to, in the meantime, shut myself down to carry on. Thank God we can shut ourselves down, but the point of these workshops is to come back, to learn how to be with other people again, and to, as I was saying, 95% of our history we've been in animistic connection, and the grief is something that kind of requires this extended nervous system, and so that's partially why we do it in groups. And it's really such a deep relief to be able to allow what you didn't realize was inside of you to come and to flow and to be falling back into that connection again.
And just to kind of answer your question about, oh gosh, what were you saying?
What it means to be kind of fully human.
No, after that, kind of how to face the uncertainty of what's happening.
Oh, yeah.
The kind of natural fruit of turning towards the pain and the grief and allowing it to move through, other than this kind of sense of being reconnected and flowing again, and this natural joy that arises, is also this kind of more embodied sense of being a cell in the body of Earth. And when that happens, then you are able to kind of also get a felt sense of what Joanna calls like emergent intelligence. And so emergent intelligence is this, like when I connect my day-to-day life is like as an individual, right? And the only way that I can affect change is if I gather enough power to hold over others or life, and so it's moving to this kind of systemic view of change, which is that we are a cooperative, interconnected system, and intelligence emerges in response to a crisis as a result of all the parts being in connection, communication, and coherence. And so when you open and unblock the feeling sense and you come back into this embodied sense of being part of a larger system, then you don't feel the pressure of having to change the world, because you're a part of, like, whatever is bringing you, turns you on in the deepest way, whatever like is bringing you joy when you're connected to the system, which is different to what brings you joy when you're a separate individual, is part of the systemic response of Earth in, to the crisis. So you become part of the immune response. And so it's like, it's not up to one individual neuron in the brain to come up with the thoughts, but that neuron can participate in the generation of thoughts, right? It's a similar thing, like it's not up to one cell in the immune system to conquer the illness, but it can participate in the systemic response to that. And so when you allow yourself to feel part of the system through this process, then the pressure isn't on so much, and you can be more kind of like fluidly responsive to your world. And that is a game changer. As an activist, like that is a game changer. And that's one of the ways that we avoid the burnout that often happens from people who really care, because it's like this major pressure. And it's like, if you look at what's happening on the world right now, there's no good reason to be optimistic for change. But if you have a kind of systemic or complexity view of the world, and you have an understanding of emergent intelligence and responses, you understand that just the most incredible things that can happen that you've not ever thought about and one person could never imagine, taking place over timelines that go beyond the individual lifespan as well. And so that's another thing that happens through this process, is you kind of, I think a lot of us who are part of this caring for the world and wanting to change the world are somehow like, well, it'll never happen in my lifetime or my child's lifetime, so why even bother? Whereas this, you kind of, you let go into being part of a bigger body, and the fruit of what's going to happen becomes, over many, many lifetimes, becomes good enough. It's like just participating in the system's healing is good enough. Whether I actually get to be there to celebrate at the end, if there is such a thing as an end, it's a really profound shift in consciousness and way of seeing.
It's a shift. Ultimately, it's a shift in identity.
Yeah.
This work is about a shift in identity, and it's again, to quote old Buna, because we really do like the guy, that he says something like, when you connect in this way, the long loneliness of the human species comes to an end.
Yeah.
And we're all going to die. Our world is suffering, and also you're not who you think you are. Like you're not as small and powerless as you think you are. There's a lot of misunderstanding and misperception going on, and it's a deep it's a bone deep relief to come into this re-identification. We need it. The earth needs it, and it's I think then that it leads naturally into the next kind of aspect of the work that reconnects, which is this seeing with ancient and new eyes, which we don't have to go too deeply into it, but basically frameworks for understanding our larger body and therefore our identity as the Gaian self-organized, infinitely complex, very old intelligence that is just impossibly beautiful and endlessly creative and innovative, and from which these glorious plant medicines and fungi derive, and which are really kind of ecologically mandated, in a sense, from the earth to help us to remember, to help us to just remember that we've never been separate. And so the last part of the work that reconnects this seeing with new and ancient eyes is it just helps us to kind of give forth is the last part. Sorry, the second last part. Yeah, this next part, helps us to kind of give language and framework to a new perspective on this identity, to help to hold it, because language is one of those things that I understand you're into, David Abram, as well, and that he articulates things so beautifully, and the importance of language really comes home when I read his stuff. But frameworks and language are actually more necessary than I used to believe, into drawing down the dream into the the beta frequencies that we're engaging in now. And then you want to speak to any of that, or ramble over?
Beautifully said. Yep, beautifully said. All of it. Look, and I think this is a good place for us to wrap things up. And before I ask where people can find you, and you can give people a little bit of insight into your upcoming workshops and immersions and moving forward for both of you, I just wanted to take it back to what I was asking, and something that come to mind as well that people can implement immediately after finishing listening to this conversation is asking questions and seeking out better questions as well, and holding the questions that we're asking and finding. And it's carrying those questions with us, but it's also letting those questions carry us as well.
Yeah, beautifully said.
I mean, if you're looking for an immediate practice for people, then I feel like taking these questions and going and doing a sit spot on the land is very, very powerful. I mean, if you don't have land, then on your meditation cushion or wherever you want to be, but holding these questions without the anxiety of having to have an answer, but just letting them work on you, maybe over a whole lifetime. Joanna Macy speaks about how every single person comes into this world with a kind of question in their heart. And so she speaks to how her particular one is, how can I be present for my world? And how her entire life and all of her work has come forth from holding this question, how can I be present for my world? And I love that. I love the idea of of like how we each have a question in our heart that our work and our whole life kind of orients around. So I guess it's about finding what your question is. Yeah.
Or, eat more kale and buy a t-shirt, and sign up for a fucking deep ecology workshop. Plants, like, I mean, work it out, you can do it. But yeah, no, it's all good advice. Let the question work on you.
For sure. Okay. Closing remarks on where people can find you and upcoming offerings.
So we've just updated our website, but we're updating it more. So it's cicadiadepthperception.org. And that's the same for our Facebook page and our Instagram. That's the easiest way to get hold of us, I guess, is either one of those platforms. Yeah, and so we had a lot of stuff planned for this year, which, like most people, had to be put down to the side, which was in many ways actually a blessing. But we have a workshop coming up, which is fully booked ready in October, if it doesn't have to be postponed again, which is a deep ecology workshop. And we're coming up with a bunch of other ones after October. So we're going to kind of wait until then, when all the restrictions have eased up more and everything feels like it's in the clear. But yeah, going forward, we're going to be offering work that is a kind of combination of the work that reconnects and our kind of plant relational partnership dieta work, and bringing the two together. We're also offering one-on-one work once we've moved into our new home. So we're in the process of transitioning to that at the moment. But once we're settled, we're going to be doing one-on-one consults and work with people. So yeah, folks can reach out to us for that as well.
And if money isn't an issue, the deep ecology workshops that we work at Reconnect, stuff that we do is pretty affordable. And also, I mean, we've been pretty much up until now, we've been doing them entirely for charitable causes like Earth focused causes, Melbourne Rainforest Action Group, and Indigenous Seed Network, and this kind of thing. So I think that's also something which is okay, but we can also we do kind of try and make it as accessible as possible. And then we also have our, as Skye was saying, our kind of combination work, which we charge for a bit more, because we have to buy bread from Coles and stuff. But yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, fantastic. And for the listeners, I will have all of the links and resources to everything mentioned in this particular conversation over at the show notes. So, Skye, Helm, what a pleasure it was to converse on all of these pertinent themes that are running so deeply throughout all of our lives on an individual and collective level. And lastly, just as we opened up the space and you guys shared some words in honor of our time together and in honor of the sacred, I'd love to invite you to share something to close up our container, whether it's a prayer, poem, words of thanks, gratitude, as you wish.
I'd like to share a poem that so we were speaking before, and Skye didn't want me to do this, but we were speaking before about how great it feels to come back into animist connection, perception, and I was thinking, how can I prove this beyond reasonable doubt, to someone who's sitting on the other side of there scratching their heads. And I thought, so recently we've had this reawakening to poetry, and we just find it like it's awesome. It's just so reconnecting. It's like this window into someone's soul, who's like sitting at the edge of the world, like looking into the deeps, and the good stuff, I mean. And so in that spirit, I present to you my conclusive proof that animism is sexy. Okay, this is called Whales Weep Not by D.H. Lawrence. They say the sea is cold, but the sea contains the hottest blood of all, and the wildest, the most urgent. All the whales in the wider deeps, hot are they, as they urge on and dive beneath the icebergs. The right whales, the sperm whales, the hammerheads, the killers, there they blow, hot, wild, white breath out of the sea. And they rock through the sensual, ageless ages on the depths of the seven seas. And through the salt they reel with drunk delight, and in the tropics tremble they with love, and roll with massive, strong desire like gods. Then the great bull lies up against his bride in the deep bed of the sea, as mountain pressing on mountain in the zest of life. And out of the inward roaring of the inner red ocean of whale blood, the long tip reaches strong, intense like the maelstrom tip, and comes to rest in the clasp and the soft white clutch of the she-whale's fathomless body. And over the bridge of the whale's strong phallus linking the wonder of whales, the burning archangels under the sea keep passing back and forth, keep passing, archangels of bliss. From him to her, from her to him, great cherubim that wait on whales in mid-ocean, suspended in the waves of the sea. Great heaven of whales in the water's old hierarchies. And enormous mother whales lie dreaming, suckling their whale-tender young, and dreaming with strange whale eyes wide open in the waters of the beginning and the end. And bull whales gather their women and whale calves in a ring when danger threatens on the surface of the ceaseless flood, and range themselves like great fierce seraphim facing the threat encircling their huddled monsters of love. And all this happens in the sea, in the salt, where God is also love, but without words. And Aphrodite is the wife of whales, most happy, happy she. And Venus among the fishes skips and is a she-dolphin. She is the gay, delighted porpoise, sporting with love. And the sea, she is the female tunnyfish, round and happy among the males, and dense with happy blood, dark rainbow bliss in the sea.
There's nothing like a little bit of cetacean phallic ritualism and dolphin mythology to end the show. So fantastic. I love it. Yeah, this has been such a great conversation for me, really nourishing and nurturing. So yeah, big thanks again for carving out the space out of your day to come and have this trialogue.
Likewise, it's been beautiful, and thank you again so much. And please keep listening to your earth-derived, impulse to do this kind of stuff.
Mirrored right back to you both.